IB Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Happy Tuesday. Merry Christmas Eve. We got a lot of stuff going on over here. So it's my man, Bryan. We're ready to dive into it today, man. We got a lot of stuff happening over at Irish Breakdown. We're now 8 days away from Notre Dame taking on the Georgia Bulldogs in the All-State Sugar Bowl, which kicks off on New Year's Day. Unfortunately, the game's at 8:45 p.m., so hopefully everybody doesn't have too crazy of a New Year's Eve, and they're going to be good to go on New Year's Day night. But a lot of matchup things that we're going to dive into throughout the week today.
Trev, that's the nice thing about an 8:45 kickoff is some of the people that like to have a good time on New Year's Eve are going to have plenty of time to recover before that 8:45 kickoff. They may not remember the 1 o'clock game, but they should be good to go by the 8:45 game.
Yeah, a nap might happen for the 1 o'clock game, but for 8:45, hopefully all of ND Nation's going to be good to go and tuning in to watch the boys take on the Georgia Bulldogs. But Bryan, today we are going to kick off our preview for the Notre Dame-Georgia matchup, and we're going to first talk about what's at stake for Notre Dame. Obviously the forefront of you got to stay alive and make it through the playoffs if you want to give yourself a chance at a national championship. But we're also going to talk big picture. What would a win over Georgia mean for Notre Dame's program? What would it mean for Marcus Freeman? And, there's all these talks about contract extension. And then we're going to kind of take a little bit more of a deep dive into Georgia. We're going to separate it into a few parts, talk about the Georgia offense. We're going to talk about their season as a whole, kind of a preview of how they got here, just kind of an overview of what's led them to getting the number 2 seed. And then we're going to get some early thoughts on the matchup. We're going to talk about Notre Dame's offense versus Georgia's defense, vice versa, from a high level, because we're going to be diving into everything after the holiday here in a lot of detail. And then we're going to wrap everything up with some more exciting news with the Ben Nichols commitment for the 2026 class. So a lot to dive into today, Bryan. I'm excited to get into it, man.
Me too, man. This is what you want to be, right? This is where you want to be if you're a Notre Dame fan. This is where you want to be for the Notre Dame program, right? You've got an opportunity on a biggest stage in the country, primetime game, college football playoffs, quarterfinals, to say, hey, listen, we are an elite program, right? And that's what's at stake for Notre Dame, is to be able to show, hey, we are an elite program. We are the kind of team that can go out there and play with anybody and beat anybody. And or the opposite is same old Notre Dame will be the talking point, right? If you can't win this game. But this is what you ask for. I mean, you can't prove yourself to be an elite team if you can't get onto an elite stage, right? And that's what Notre Dame has earned, and that's where they are, and that's what Georgia has earned, against one of the toughest schedules in the country. And so we're gonna dive into this matchup and have some fun talking about that. I mean, and again, like you said, Trev, this is just kind of a higher level, bigger picture sort of intro into this breakdown, because there's going to be a lot more we're going to be doing here in the show. And then of course we're going to have some stuff on the premium message board as well. And so, man, it's like, I'm like behind. I wanted to get a film breakdown done of the Indiana game, but I've been so immersed in this Georgia film that I haven't been able to finish that. But I do plan on getting some of that Indiana film done. But, man, this is a big one, Trev. This is what all the work is for, right? This is what all the winter workouts are for. What spring practice, the grind of spring practice. This is why you sacrifice your summers to be here in South Bend, Indiana, as a player and as a coach, to make sure that you're putting in the work. This is why you put in all the work and all the hitting and the running and the physicality and the work and the sacrifices you make as a player to be on this stage, to have this opportunity to show the world who you are as a program. And that's what Notre Dame has earned for itself. This is a stage that's very familiar for Georgia in recent seasons. Notre Dame hasn't been on the stage since 2020. And even then, I don't know if the stage was as big, just because of the circumstances of who could and couldn't be at games and just the whole weirdness of COVID. And this is the first time since 2018 that Notre Dame went into the postseason with a team that you thought, boy, if they play their game, they can hang with some people. And it was an interesting road to get here. But they're here for both teams, really, who both teams at one point in time in the season suffered a loss that knocked them out of the top 10, and both climbed back in. Notre Dame's was a much higher climb because they fell further down because they lost to a worse opponent, but they also lost much earlier. Whereas, as we're going to find out, Clemson or Georgia had a second loss in November that they had to climb back from, which is partly how well they played in some games, but also partly because other teams kept losing. and that helped them climb back in. But at the end of the day, they got a chance to play for the SEC title, and they got it done. Went to overtime and got it done. So I'm excited about this matchup. I've said all along, I want Bama. I want Georgia, not from the standpoint of those teams suck, Notre Dame can, but it's like that's the teams you want to prove yourself. We talked about this before the playoffs even started, Trevor. Yeah, getting Clemson and Arizona State as the 5 seed would have been the easiest path to get to the semifinals. But if you'd have won both of those games, the storyline would still be the same. Well, you haven't beat anybody, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. You wouldn't have been tested in quite a while. Now you want that. Hey, look, if you want to prove yourself as a program, you want to find out truly where you are. Either A, you've arrived, or B, you're not quite there yet. You do it against teams like this. No disrespect to Indiana, Trev. I mean, my rant the other night showed that I believed Indiana belonged on that stage. They earned their right as a darn good top 12 football team to be on that stage with Notre Dame. But you don't come to Notre Dame to prove yourself against Indiana. You come to Notre Dame to prove yourself against teams like Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State. And that's where Notre Dame finds themselves. And that's what it's all about. That's what it's all for. That's what all of this is for, is to get on this stage. And now it's time for these players to prove that they do or don't belong on this stage. Let me rephrase that. They flat out belong on this stage. It's whether or not they've quite kicked down the door to where they are part of that A-list group of teams for what they do on the field. That's the big question. And until they beat one of those type of teams, now you could argue they beat Clemson, but when they beat Clemson, Trev, they weren't elite Clemson teams. Those were either A, down Clemson teams like they were in 2022, or a Clemson team that was missing their star quarterback and 3 other studs from their defense because of stupid COVID rules in 2020, right? Like, that's a different story. And then when they got a chance to rematch against that same Clemson team in 2020 with all those players as part of what they're doing, they got smacked. So that's the reality of it. They've been close against Georgia. They've been close against Ohio State, but it's time for Notre Dame to kick down that door, and they've earned the right to be on the stage where they can prove that or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all roads lead to this, right? You hear the coin phrase, this is why you come to Notre Dame, to play in these kind of games. And I couldn't agree more with that. But you could make the argument that dating back to 2005 in the USC game, right? Like, this has been the type of game that Notre Dame just can't get over that hump, right? You lose to USC in 05. Fast forward to 2012, you can't get over Bama. 2015, you can't get over Clemson. 17, you can't get over Georgia. 19, you can't get over Georgia. 18, you couldn't get over Clemson. So,
and 05 and 15, you also lost Ohio State in 05 right. and 15 in postseason games.
Mm-hmm. So all roads kind of lead back to this. And, I know we're getting a little bit ahead of it, but for big picture sake, this is what's at stake, right? And I know we're going to dive into that a little bit, but for the right now, right? And, looking forward short term, and what's kind of stake at Notre Dame for Notre Dame going into this bowl matchup against Georgia? For me, the first thing that comes to mind is kind of getting that monkey off your back of not winning a New Year's Six bowl since 1993, right? Because there's a difference. You won in the first round of the playoff, first ever playoff game at home, and it was a great win. It was the most high-octane win on that stage since 1993, but you still kind of have that little monkey on your back of, yeah, great, but now go play Georgia in the Sugar Bowl down in SEC country and then talk to me after that game, right? So, that's, starting off directly in front of you. That's what I think is at stake for Notre Dame initially, outside of the obvious of keeping your hopes alive to play for a national championship. What say you, Bryan?
Trev, I mean, you're spot on. This is what it's all about. This is where you want to be. And I'm reading through the chat. A lot of Notre Dame fans are already dealing with it. It's the talk. Notre Dame sucks. Like, I remember when Notre Dame played Georgia in 2017 and 2019, before Georgia won titles. I remember interacting with their fans, and 9 out of 10 of them were awesome. Respected Notre Dame. They weren't that flaming, ridiculous SEC is great at everything and everybody else sucks crowd. They were, hey, look, we respect Notre Dame as a program, and Notre Dame respects Georgia as a program. Now, I don't know if it's just a different type of crowd. I don't know what it is, but now it's just, oh my God, some of y'all are just obnoxious. And just like, you clearly haven't watched anyone outside your league, have you? Just some of the stuff that you hear. So, I mean, but listen, as we've said, Trev, Alabama fans can say all they want about Notre Dame. Ohio State fans can say whatever they want about Notre Dame. Georgia fans can say whatever they want about Notre Dame. You know why? Because Notre Dame hasn't beaten those teams. Notre Dame hasn't beaten Alabama since 1987. They haven't beaten Ohio State since the 1930s. Now, again, they've only played like 4 times since then, right? When they haven't beaten Georgia in their 3 matchups, including twice recently. So until they beat those teams, you got to take it. You know, as a Notre Dame fan, you got to take it. And hopefully, Trev, come, the clock turning over to January 2nd, because this game is going to probably get over after midnight. Hopefully, Notre Dame will do what they need to do to where you can finally say, okay, Notre Dame has truly had that we've arrived moment, and now it's about what's next and getting ready to go play, because you'll know who you're going to play, because it's the last game of the quarterfinals. We'll know, is it going to be Boise State or Penn State? Mm-hmm. And, this is what you live for. This is what you've been working for. I don't know, Trev, you tell me. Yes, preparing for Arizona State right now would be a lot more less stressful, if I'm being honest. Could Arizona State make it competitive against Notre Dame? Sure. Is Arizona State going to beat Notre Dame? Heck to the no. But I honestly would rather be here. And not because I fear Georgia less than Arizona State. It's because these are the games where you want to prove yourself, with all due respect. Not beating Arizona State in a semifinal and then losing to Oregon or Ohio State because you're not good enough in the semifinals. Prove yourself now. And if you prove yourself now, then that's where you are. You know you're ready. And if you're not, it's okay, Coach Freeman, Coach Bowden, rest of your staff. It's back to the drawing board. What do you now have to do to get to that level? And we'll find that out. We'll find that out. But man, I'm just ready for all the. It's like, gosh, just the SEC fans have not all of them, right? I mean, not all of them. We've got some really good ones in our chat. Just like not all Ohio State fans are the same, because Archer proves that, right? But man, the mouthy ones on Twitter, you just want to slap them. Like, come on, man. Like, just be a grown up. But that's what it's about. Till your team can win those games, that's how it's going to be.
I love these style of games, man. I mean, if you're an ultimate competitor, you want to beat the best, and let's call a spade here. That's Georgia. And Nick Saban says it. I mean, what feels like every single college game day show. But there's got to be a team that can take down Georgia. Like, that is the team to beat. And right now, I believe that it is. They've won 2 of the 3 last national championships, 2 of them back to back. Right. And you make the argument, one of the reasons why they didn't win the Natty last year is because they just weren't in the playoffs. Who knows what would have happened if that team made it? Now, I'm not saying that they were good enough to beat Michigan, but I know for certain you're not winning a national championship if you're not in the playoffs.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
anything could have happened last year, Trev. Those were 4 relatively evenly matched teams, but I don't think Georgia would have been able to beat Michigan for the same reason Bama couldn't beat Michigan.
Sure.
They weren't as good in the trenches as they've been in the past years, especially on offense. Yeah. But like you said, you don't know that. We don't know. Mm-hmm. And their down year of not winning a title ended with what, 13-1?
Yeah. 13-1 and like a 66-0 victory over Florida State.
Was it 63-3? Something stupid like that. Now, granted, that Florida State team had checked out, but still, I don't think Florida State beats them even if they're healthy.
No.
I mean, Florida State belonged in the playoff. I don't care what anybody says, but without Jordan Travis, they were going to have no chance against Georgia, even if everybody else stayed in there. They just they weren't the same team without him.
100%. I mean, but they're the team to beat. I mean, the thing that kept them out of the playoffs last year was their first loss in like 29 games. Yeah, which is crazy to think about. So Georgia is that team, and Notre Dame has the opportunity to go prove that they belong. Kind of switching over to big picture here. Notre Dame has been perennially stuck in like that in between, like kind of that no man's land of like, you're not quite a tier 2 team because you're a little bit better than some of the other tier 2 teams, but you're not a tier 1 team either.
Yeah. Like, you're at the top of that tier 2, but you can't quite kick down the door into tier 1, I mean, and like, look, so who's in the playoff right now? Number 1 seed Oregon, number 2 seed Georgia, number 3 seed Boise State, number 4 seed Arizona State, number 5 seed Texas, number 6 seed Penn State, number 7 seed Notre Dame, number 8 seed Ohio State. In the last 10 years, how many of those teams have won a championship? Because Ohio State's is just outside the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Theirs is 11. So, I mean, this is still king of the hill. It's not Bama. It's not Michigan. Michigan kind of slightly knocked Georgia off, and then they just kind of fell off by themselves. You know what I mean? And Georgia kind of rose back to the top. So this is that prove it moment. I mean, like, you know, we talk about what's at stake, Trevor. Like, that's the big picture thing. I mean, this is the big picture aspect of what we're talking about. We're going to dive into what's at stake more specifically to 2024 here in a second. But honestly, that's as big as this is as big as the macro is as big as the micro, or in this particular instance, or it's at least the same level of it, because it's not just, okay, you advance. This is the kind of statement win as a program that changes your course as a program. And they've all had them. Every program has had them, right? I mean, what was the storyline about Dabo when he first was coming up as a coach? Clemsoning, right? Can't beat Florida State, can't beat South Carolina, because Steve Spurrier owned him and can't win big games. And in the same year, he beat Florida State, South Carolina, and Notre Dame. And that's what turned the corner for that program, beating Notre Dame on that national stage. And then, of course, goes to the title game that year. They lose. They go back the next year. They win. 2 years later, they win again. What was the storyline with Kirby Smart when he first got hired at Georgia, right? I mean, it wasn't like, oh, Kirby Smart, he's done good. He turned things around immediately, and they became a dominant program because they hadn't been dominant for years. Georgia had been excellent under Mark Richt for a long time, a very long time. Mark Richt was a heck of a football coach, but what can Mark Richt not do? He couldn't beat the big time teams. He couldn't beat the teams that, you know, win those games that truly mattered. He had Georgia several times on that stage with an opportunity to go win a national championship, and he couldn't get him over the hump. You know, just couldn't get him over the hump, and couldn't beat Urban Meyer when they were good, right? I mean, he had some great teams that played against them and just couldn't beat them with any regularity, and couldn't beat Alabama when they were good. And that's what Kirby Smart's problem was, Trev, when he got hired. His first year was 2016, right? Lost to Alabama in the college and national championship game in 17. Lost to Alabama the next year in the SEC championship game. Lost to Alabama in 2020. Lost to Alabama in the SEC title game in 2021. Couldn't beat Bama. And then what happened? All right, he finally beat Bama, right? I mean, they got their rematch in 2021 and were able to beat Alabama to get to that championship. Now, he hasn't beaten Bama since, right? You know, but he earned that right by, hey, you got your chance on the biggest stage to beat that Bama team and prove yourself, and they went out there and got that job done. And every team that has had to ascend to that level has had to overcome that type of, you know, obstacle, and now this is the one for Notre Dame at the micro level. Now, on the smaller, the present scale, the more immediate scale, this is your opportunity to sort of survive and advance. Like, that's the reality of it. This is a survive. You earn the opportunity to go play in the semifinals while knocking out arguably the biggest title contender you will have to face the rest of the way, right? I think arguably, because I think Oregon and Ohio State will have something to say about that, right? But I mean, this is the team that's proven it. And that's why I say, like, give me those teams early, because you're going to have to play them eventually anyway. Knock them out now while you're still a little bit more fresh than you will be by the time you get to game 4.
Yeah.
And that's what Notre Dame has an opportunity to do.
Yeah. I mean, they have an opportunity to, you know, keep the narrative alive that they are a championship contending football team, regardless of what happened on September 7th, because we've spent a lot of time talking about Notre Dame's season and how it from a big picture scale kind of turned out the way that we thought. We thought they'd be hosting a home playoff game. We thought they'd be 11-1. You know, we thought they'd beat Texas A&M. Just a lot of the things in between, you know what I mean, just didn't really break out the way that we had all thought. But regardless, they're here. They are now winners of 11 straight, 10 of those by double digits. And they have the opportunity to continue on that path. But, you know, in order to do so, you kind of have to go through the team that's kind of held college football in check. But to your point, I wouldn't rather it be against anybody else. You know, I mean, like, I would hear out, you know, maybe if they had Ohio State in the second round, because, like, I think based on preseason hype, that was kind of the next team that everybody just assumed was going to go win the national championship this year based on the layout of their roster.
Understandably so.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. So, you know, outside of Ohio State, this is the team that I would want Notre Dame to face in the quarterfinals to, have the opportunity to get their first New Year's Six bowl win, because I do think that's another thing that's, in kind of the short term. That will be just another thing to help build the momentum for this program. And I'm happy that they had that lesson on September 7th of learning how to handle success, because now this team will be coined as, there will be some disagreements or agreements based on the make out of the roster, right? But it will start being coined as the best team Notre Dame has had since 1993, and like that is that's no easy thing to be coined as, right? Notre Dame's had a lot of good teams since 1993. And, their lessons of being able to handle success, I think would help them greatly if they're able to pull this off. But it has to be, all focused mental, physical preparation on Georgia first, right? Because this is a big one.
Yeah, there is no next game, right,
Mm-hmm.
for Notre Dame. It's this game. Last week you understood, maybe you would hope that they didn't look past Indiana thinking about Georgia. There's no looking past Georgia for two reasons. Number one is you don't know who your next opponent's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be one of two. But number two, there is no next week. You know what I mean? Like this is the game that defines you. And it's a big one. It's the one that you start talking about going to the portal and having a little bit more sway with some big name kids about, hey, come here and you're going to be part of a championship football team. Same thing with top high school recruits, the guys that they're finishing second and third for right now, that they want to finish first for. It's not just about NIL with all these kids. Some of them it is. And those type of kids you don't worry about. You don't waste your time with them. But for some of them, yeah, I'm getting a good NIL deal from you and I'm getting a good NIL deal from this other school. But, man, I want to play for championship. And this school's proven that they can develop this kind of thing and that kind of thing. And you go out and do those things, and now you're on that level. So that's what this win can do on top of just getting you to the point where you can say, hey, look, you 2 down, 2 to go. And that's really where you're at. You're at that halfway point to a championship, because ultimately that's the goal, right? Is Notre Dame a championship team this season? I don't know. And I'll have a much better idea of that by the end of this game on September 1st. Most likely rolling into January 2nd.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately what's at stake for Notre Dame.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Sorry, Trev. I just want to say one last thing when you talk about this too. I'm very curious to see if and I'd like to kind of find out from Georgia fans, if there are any in the chat, and SEC fans. I'm very curious to hear what the storyline will be about Georgia if they do in fact lose to Notre Dame. Like that'll be something I'm very curious about. Like because 22 they won, 23 they didn't get in, 24 they wouldn't have won it. Is it simply Carson Beck didn't play? Is it as simple and lazy as that, or is there something else to it about, is Kirby Smart really doing the things that he needs to do to make sure his team is maximizing its potential? Because as we'll talk about here over this next week or so, I think there's certainly areas where Georgia's not getting the most out of their talent based on what we see on film. So it's going to be very interesting to see kind of what the storylines are coming out of this one. Very interesting. So go ahead. You got something to add to that?
No, I was just what you brought up is a good transition into kind of what we were about to talk about. So no, go ahead.
Now, I was to say, hey, before we hit that next section, do us a favor. You see that thumbs up down there? Go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. It's great Christmas. If you're having Christmas parties, you have Notre Dame friends and family. Hey, guys, do you guys know about Irish Breakdown? Let them know what we got going on. You can find us, obviously, here at our YouTube channel. You can also find us on the podcast app. And, of course, you can always find us at irishbreakdown.com. And, of course, our premium message board, which is the place to be, at boards.irishbreakdown.com.